Good evening and happy Tuesday, friends. My name is Emma G. Welcome to the inaugural Reconnect Your Teenager podcast with yours truly. If you don't know who I am, hello, my name is Emma G. I am originally from New Zealand, now living in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area and working not only as a musician, but as you can see behind me with all the music equipment, but also as a keynote speaker, TEDx speaker, and youth empowerment through songwriting coach. Youth empowerment is such a huge component of my life and my passion. And I am particularly excited to be launching today the Youth Empowerment podcast that you're watching right now, the Reconnect Your Teenager podcast. And today, for the very first episode, we have Dr. Judy, who is a Parenting Matters consultant. So hello, Dr. Judy. How are you tonight?
Hi, thank you, Emma G. Thank you for inviting me to speak on a very passionate topic. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Well, I mean, that's exactly what it is, right? Like it's a passion project. They often say, in fact, back when I first started getting into not just teaching, but in youth empowerment work, specifically with the YMCA, and this was, gosh, in 2011 and 12. One of the things that they told me at the very beginning was, this is not an industry you get into because you want to make the big bucks. It's an industry that is a passion project because, you know, we want to make sure that we are building a more resilient future for our young people and generations after. So what is it that got you involved in youth work?
Well, it was interesting because I started thinking back chronologically, and I started working with foster youth in the 90s, like 1997, and helping them get, transition from high school to college, and helping them with, independent skills, those launching skills. And then I also was working with foster parents and training them on how to work with the teens, and especially teens from trauma and challenging behaviors. And through that journey, part of foster care, I'm in California, became to where we started to work with our trafficking survivors, our youth that were survivors of trafficking. And so I'm also a mentor for survivors, and I'm an educator for trafficking. I coach with teens, and I coach a lot with parents with teens. And now I'm working just this year launching relational redesign, which is for moms and daughters, teens and tweens, to reconnect and kind of redesign their relationships. So a lot of different areas, but just that whole thread through that is the importance and my passion, again, of working with teenagers.
That is awesome. And I think one of the things that most fascinates me and intrigues me almost about what the work is that you do, and I'm really passionate about the elevator pitch. I don't know if this is like a normal youth work thing, but because of my background as an entertainer, I've always been like, okay, so what's your elevator pitch? If you were stuck in an elevator with Elon Musk or whatever, what would you say you do? Please don't get stuck in an elevator with Elon Musk. But but your elevator pitch was that you help families getting reconnected and to be in healthy, productive relationships, through healthy boundaries and communication. And because your work specifically is with teenagers and their families as they cope through sex trafficking and human trafficking, I'm fascinated with that because I'm a huge believer in, utilizing music and almost CBT practices around trauma. But your trauma is next level. Can you tell me a little more about what that looks like and what that feels like?
Right. And so our foster teens, they tend to be a higher ratio of our kids that are trafficked. And there's lots of reasons for that. And so, but mostly all of our teens, if they're a teenager and they're still in foster care and haven't been adopted, and by that time they're teenagers, there is just so much trauma and disruption and compromise in their development. So for me, understanding and realizing that resiliency of that trauma is for them to have a really solid, even if it's one solid adult, one person that can help them feel safe and help them navigate. That's when they can be successful and kind of move on with their lives. And then with the trafficking, I think just working with these teens and understanding that just the it's so nefarious with all the way that kids get into trafficking, the misunderstanding. So I'm a traffic educator. I educate parents. I also do, like, hotels that need to educate their employees, and casinos and airports, because of the misunderstanding that a lot of people don't realize that it's in local communities. And then when you mentioned the pandemic, with that shift of the hotels kind of closing down, a lot of it turned towards like vacation rentals and VRBOs. And so there's that education component to the community, and I'm on a trafficking task force, but there's also that wrapping around what these kids so desperately need, and just through healing. And that healing, like you said, the trauma is horrific with that.
It's really fascinating to me, because I don't know if this has been your experience, but I feel as if the last 3 years have kind of really elevated awareness and a drive for the world, if we're being completely honest, to really stand up, recognize that there are some issues that we've been kind of ignoring and sweeping under the rug for the last many, many years. What is it that got you involved in this kind of work in the first place?
Well, I think my background is early childhood education. I was a teacher, so I always loved that, the education community, and just really for some reason got along with teens. I don't know. I always really enjoyed teens, and as it kind of developed, usually the talking to parents about teens, it was them not understanding that, it's their job kind of get their new identity and move away a little from the parents, and that sort of disruption. So that was pretty normal. But with the pandemic happening, oh boy, so we had these families thrown in together, and then we added this, because when I first started working with them, we didn't really have the social media influence, and that social media influence has been huge. And it kind of just exploded when these kids were isolated, and the pandemic, everyone was home, and that was just the go-to, a lot of the social media. And with that social media, we lost influence with our teens. Our parents do. And so the problem is that when we're in relationship, we have more influence with our teens. And so when we're stuck in the same room, and all the pandemic stuff and just that kind of all explosion, and then we have that added the influencers and all the TikTok and all that, it's just, we lose influence from our kids, and that divide just got so much bigger, and the misunderstanding, and then the dynamics. I think the pandemic really kind of set that on fire a little bit.
It's interesting. I've kind of, given that I technically am a millennial, believe it or not. I know I look so old for my age. No, I'm kidding. But with being a millennial and knowing that this next generation of Gen Z people are really, living growing up in a world that is changing so rapidly from a day-to-day basis. It's one of the things that I don't know, I feel in my core rather. It's almost like you've got to, champions make adjustments. You've got to try and figure out how to navigate that world of social media, of isolation, of, I don't know if I'm sure you've seen this, where young people are finding it more and more difficult to communicate with their peers and with each other without their Snapchat filters and all the fun thing, right? So with your work specifically, if we were to get down to the nitty-gritty, how are you managing to navigate through that world, given that, you've been doing this work for a minute,
long time,
which is great. And, it comes with a wealth of experience. And so you've seen the very gradual and the very not so gradual changes happen over the years, when it comes to how young people are developing, growing up, and learning about the world. So back to my original question, like, how are you shifting and making adjustments in what you do when it comes to working with the parents of teenagers and specifically with the teenagers themselves?
Right. And I lived through the teenage years. My youngest is 20, but he was one of the 2020 COVID graduates, high school graduates. And so that was, so we were kind of in the mix of all of that.
That's rough. Yeah.
But yeah, but what I just kind of see this thread when I work with parents that are struggling with their teens is I ask them to do this. I ask them to do this. And the parents want to bring these kids into their world by asking them questions and let's go here and let's go there. And the kids are like, but they rarely tiptoe into their world and they don't go into theirs. And I this kind of was an aha for me. And so I went and sat with my son, and he was really interested in computers and he wanted to build a computer. And I was like, I don't know about it. And so just really said, you know what? Go into his world. And so I helped him. He designed his computer. He built it when he was 14. He's still using the same computer. But I also stepped into, okay, tell me about your game. What's this game that you're doing and what? And initially I was thinking, I will never get this time back in my life. I thought it was such a waste of time. I would never be able to replace this time. But then I started asking questions and he would come in, hey, Mom, you know what? And so then I took him to like these conferences that are they're like playing the game on big screens and there's, competitions and the world competition. And I was like, all right. And I'm like, let's do it. I was definitely the oldest one in the audience, And so, but I stepped into his world and I learned his language and I actually learned how to play one of his games and I was challenging his friends and I won.
Oh, go ahead.
So it was like, I'm like this gamer in my 60s and, so,
Yeah.
but I was like, gosh, if I didn't even take that dip or dip my toe into his world, I don't know where we'd be. And so now we have the same conversations and I make a point of listening to what he's interested to and go, tell me about that, and now I'm watching the NBA and now I'm, and so I'm in, pool, betting pools with my son to try to figure out who's going to win. But, I thought this is so much fun. It opens it up to me, but we got to be willing to step into their world.
Right.
And so that was one huge thing. And the other thing too, is what happens is that kids like trying on their own identity, which is a little bit different with the social media. It's a little bit more, it could be flamboyant or trying more risk taking. And often as parents, what happens is that's when they just start to squeeze and control. And I'm taking away your phone and you're this and you're that and the other thing, and you're in bed by 9. So it's like this inverted kind of parenting to where these kids are so, when they're young, sure, I'll take you here, I'll do this, I'll buy you this. And these, when they're young. And then as soon as the kids start getting, like, gosh, a peace of mind or a different opinion, they start squeezing it in. And so by the time they're in high school, I don't like your clothes, I don't like your hair, I don't like your music, I don't like what you watch on YouTube, and your curfew's 9:00.
Right.
And it's like they're about a half a year away from being an adult, and we've just squeezed everything, and give me your phone. And so instead of doing, let's prepare them for this world and let's get them ready to launch successfully. Right. And so that's another thing that's happening too. Our kids aren't launching successfully.
This is true. And so I'm fascinated about that, because what I'm hearing you say is that you're really working with parents to kind of ease their foot off the brake a little bit.
Exactly. Yes.
They go from the gas pedal to the brake really quickly, and that often leaves the teenagers feeling kind of like, well, shoot, what do I do here? Like I'm either doing it wrong, like all wrong, or only 50% right. But in terms of like your career as youth empowerment specialist and youth worker and parenting specialist, how, like, are there specific guidelines that you try to give parents when it comes to navigating not just social media, but the world's just more dangerous these days in real life.
Right.
So how do we and I'm saying that like I know what America was like in the 80s, but I was in New Zealand. But
Probably
you
the
know,
'60s.
safer there apparently. No, but if you know, how are you like managing to help people elevate their understanding and how they're kind of coordinating all that?
Well, the tough thing is I can't possibly parent to my son's world because it was not my world. I don't have a point of reference for it. I don't
That
have
makes
the
sense.
examples for it. I don't have the experience of it. So I'm not even, how can I parent him to, TikTok, or that kind of thing? Because I don't have the knowledge about it. And it wasn't how I grew up. So that's the
Are,
one
are
thing to do is,
you are you on TikTok? Have you
well,
gotten
my
on
son
TikTok?
does navigate me through that, so
Okay.
we have fun with it. I'm not. I do. Yeah, I have seen it before, but I'm. So so that's, so that right there is that we can't. This world is changing so much. We can't parent to it, and so us being more knowledgeable, and so the best thing we can do is support our kids in being prepared for all of this stuff. So when they're little, teach them problem solving skills, teach them how to make healthy choices, teach them how to take responsibility for their behaviors, teach them the things that are going to help them launch socially. And also within the context of all of that is help them build their inner self, their inner confidence, their inner motivation and determination. And then through all those experiences, they make good choices. And so right now we have kind of a new term that's coming out since the pandemic. It's called over accommodating parent, to where the parent's just like, it's easier for me to do everything. But then they
Hmm.
turn around and say, my kids don't do anything. My kids don't know how to help. And when you say, well, get your shoes on, like, I can't, it's too hard. I don't know how. And we're just like, we created these dynamics and then we're angry. And
Yeah.
so, what can we do to step back to empower these kids? Because we want these kids to be excited to leave the house because they're so excited for the next part of their world versus, can I sleep in the basement? And I'm
Right.
34 and I want to, and I coach parents like that. How do I get my kids out of the basement? They're playing games and they're 35. And the oldest one was 42 that I was coaching the dad. And so we want our kids to be ready to go and
Yeah.
like, just so excited with this world and the possibilities that they don't want to hang out with us and they don't want to live at our house anymore.
Interesting, because so the over what is it called? The over compensating parent?
Oh, the over accommodating parent.
Over
Yeah.
accommodating parent. Okay.
Yeah.
So the over accommodating parent, that is, I love that term, and I've definitely I can definitely understand where that came from and
Yeah.
how that came about. However, I'm curious because when you compare that to what I've heard more often of the silver spoon mentality when it comes to young people, like, have you seen it that kind of shift as well? Like, do you know what I mean by the silver spoon child?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The overindulgent parent.
Right, right. Well, not just the overindulgent, but the raising the generation of the participation award, and raising a
Exactly.
generation of young people who don't know how to navigate for themselves
Right.
or
Exactly.
speak up for themselves. Is that one and the same? Is that
Well, yeah, and it kind of goes hand in hand because, well, there's a couple things with the participation trophy, and it was kind of like in my studies. I started early childhood education in the 70s, and around the 70s, early 80s, it was this shift that you want your child to have the best self-esteem ever. And so it was praise, 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 praise. You're wonderful, you're beautiful, you're everything, you're smartest kid in the world. Here's a trophy, you didn't even show up. That kind of mentality. And what that actually did was I don't need to work for anything. I don't need to struggle. I don't need to be frustrated. And then we start to, we do we want to put the all the, we're taking any risk out of their life. So they're
hmm
not
hmm
having risk. They're not having to struggle. They're not having to figure stuff out because we swoop in and say, oh, that looks too hard. Here's something easier.
right?
So the mindset of the kids is, I'm not capable. I'm not, I don't, they don't, so they're not developing that inner confidence and that I'm going to try again. I'm not going to give up
Hmm.
because we don't give them that opportunity. And so they don't know how to get to the other side of frustration. They don't know how to get to the other side of struggle. They don't know how to get to the other side of gosh, I failed, but I can do it. And
Right.
so the mindset shift has been really different. So we're starting to have, this generation of kids with really closed mindsets of, this is who I am. I can't do it. And so that's the whole thing too of,
Mhm.
switching and letting our kids fail and like, you got this thing. If anyone can do it, you can,
Right.
try again, you got
Right.
it. And
Comfort
so that,
zone growth.
yeah. And so, well, I can't do it. Well, you can't do it yet.
Right.
Yeah, you just haven't learned yet. No big deal.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
help them with that inner growth too. And that's inner growth as well as that mindset shift as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you talk a lot about trauma, which I want to sort of dig into a little bit because obviously
Yeah.
trauma, we all wear trauma differently. My own trauma comes from having had 10 brain surgeries, amongst other, fun things. I was, a teenager when the Y2K kerfuffle
Oh,
happened. And obviously the 9/11
yeah.
and so
Yeah.
forth. But I'm intrigued how you got into the field of trauma, and
Hmm.
how that has kind of evolved over the years. The world is looking very different now than it did in '78 when you began this work. And what
Absolutely. Yeah.
and you mentioned as well that you've now shifted a little bit from working solely with parents to now working with teenagers as well. How
Yeah.
did all that come together for you?
Well, I with trauma it was interesting because when I first started working in foster care, you had this abuse and neglect is why kids were taken, and trauma wasn't part of the conversation. And soon
Oh,
it was like in the early 80s, I believe. I don't know if I'm getting my timeline, when they started noticing the post traumatic stress with Vietnam vets. And
okay.
so that's when they started doing studies, and that's when, and when they were, all this research was coming out. But then they're like, but kids are resilient. Kids are resilient. That was just, do you hear that all the time in the old days? Kids, oh, they're fine. They'll grow out of it. They're resilient. And what they realized, it doesn't work that way. And so there was this I'm trying to think of her name. I can't, but anyway, she did some research and it was like childhood trauma is extreme. And so now they got this ACEs, adverse childhood experience, and they're starting to study it. And it's just so huge how much trauma our kids actually have. And now there are studies on how these traumas directly affect brain compromise and directly affects behaviors. And
Mm,
so that's what my dissertation research was on, is that early trauma and how it affects kids' behaviors through the brain compromise. And so what the latest studies, this is like, we have ACEs, but what the latest studies are showing too, it's ACEs is based on cognitive memory of people remembering their trauma. Well, that doesn't bring in our younger kids who kind of, uh, don't even, they push it out and they black it out, some to block it out. So what they're finding now is the trauma that starts these ACEs begins in utero, in a pregnancy. It might be a violent pregnancy. It might be someone that's using drugs or alcohol during their pregnancy. So that's when their ACEs can actually start. So this is pretty new. Within the last 30 plus years, this research is so new. So now they're realizing just the dramatic impact of trauma on these kids. And if it goes unchecked, it affects their behaviors, it affects their academics, it affects their future relationships, it affects long-term health, etc. So trauma is really, really key to bring into the conversation.
I am so in love with the fact that you're doing that work because ACEs is something that I'm very acutely aware of. I know that the more adverse childhood experiences a young person
Mhm.
has, not only obviously their brain cognition and function, but also their heart health, their
Mhm.
their future health, even the risk of cancer um,
Mhm.
increases significantly. Now, you hear a lot of people talking a lot about how the first 5 years shapes a
Mhm.
young person's life when it comes to adverse childhood experiences. I've often argued, and I've been reading multiple articles and documents on, is that actually the first 4 months are even the most key. You're the first person that has mentioned the importance of in utero. So as somebody in your field, how is that one of the reasons why you're specifically working with parents when it comes to helping the young person? Like, how do you navigate that in your work as,
Yeah.
a parenting matters consultant?
Yeah. So with my background and working with foster parents, having that trauma based knowledge, it can help make or break a placement when there's a foster child in their home. Because often, we'll get foster parents so well meaning, just say we'll just give them a nice bedroom and everything will be great from here on in. But it doesn't work that way because they're still having these triggers, these trauma triggers, etc. And so helping people understand, and my foster parents understand, that trauma informed parenting is very different than typical parenting. And trauma informed parenting is about the motivation of the behaviors. It's not just about the behaviors. And when we have a child of our own that we have a really tight relationship with, we've had them since they were, we birthed them. We have that attachment and that bonding already. But when we get a kid inside from foster care, we don't. And so that trust and stability and consistency is so huge. And so that's the trauma informed parenting, that we put the relationship first, the safety and relationship first, and over, this real, obedience minded and compliance minded, it's relationship. You got to have that, with our kids. Yeah. And that trauma can't be ignored. We want to make sure that we tend to it and we're there. And I know you've probably heard of the What Happened to You book by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, which is just incredible. And so in one of their latest interviews that they did, they were talking about it's about those first 100 days, that those first couple months that are so impacting, that those are the most important time of a person's life, is those first few months. And so again, this is all really new information.
So, I love that. And it's a great book. I was listening to a podcast about that book a few months back, and I was like, I need to get that. So thank you for reminding me to get that on my
And they've done a lot of interviews too, so you can see some great YouTubes on it.
Yeah, for sure. So I know we've got a couple more minutes left. I wanted to go over really quickly, with regards to, so your focus is specifically with teenagers now, their parents, their communities. You do incredible work with the sex trafficking world. If you are a peer to somebody who has experienced significant trauma, what are some sort of handy tips and helpful kind of reminders that we can sort of share with the community when it comes to navigating healthy relationships with these people? Because not everybody is trauma informed, unfortunately. And trauma looks differently for everybody. So what are some handy sort of takeaways that you can give the everyday person?
And what I tell my parents too is don't overlook, like if their kids are saying that you're seeing the depression, you don't try to oh, come on, smile. And, we really want to take mental health really seriously, especially again, that pandemic. We want to take it. We do not want to ignore it. We don't want, I would rather be mistakenly taking my child to counseling than go, oh, nah. I mean, if I even had a doubt, that you just don't want to ignore it. You don't want to underestimate it. You don't want to tell your kids to get over it. If they're telling you, or their behaviors are showing to you that I'm not doing well, or I need help, I'm the first one to get help, or have a team get help, or connect resources, because we want our kids to be healthy, and we want them to have what they need to navigate. And it's really hard. It's really different to navigate. It was very different from when I was navigating to, to go through high school, and then from now for them it's different. And like I said, we don't know what their world is about, and so to try to tell them what we know, and they should do this and this. I don't even pretend to know what what a teenager's world is and how it affects them.
Yeah. It's one of the things I love that you acknowledge that. It's one of the things that I often talk about. It's like, yes, just because whatever the world looks like it does, it's really, and especially because I'm in the music industry, people are like, oh, she's hip, she's down with that. I'm like, sure, but our experiences, our lived experiences are very different. And so trying to navigate, I'm 34 years old, trying to navigate TikTok as a 34-year-old compared to a 16-year-old, totally different world. You'll never see me do a dance challenge. I am sorry. But at least you honor those things, right? And I think that sort of helps to build that relationship with your teenage clients. Sorry, you were going to say something.
I was going to say is that, I went to high school in the 70s. That was a long time ago. But
not that long.
Sometimes when I do groups with the parents and the teens in the group, I'll play different songs that were popular during the years that the parents were in high school. And they're like, oh yeah, because then they can remember. That's when I like so-and-so. And that's when I was wearing my, whatever pants, and that's when and the boots. And it brings them back. Music can bring them back to that place to where they are more open-minded to talk about the things of their teenager. It's really powerful.
I wonder, I'm just purely for my own ego, I'm curious, with regards to the fact that like a lot of trap and hip hop artists these days use a lot of samples from 70s and 80s music. Have you used that sort of when it comes to connecting with your teenagers that you're working with as well?
I haven't, and it's a great idea, but the reason I haven't is I haven't done stuff in person in so long,
right?
Because of COVID. I can't wait to start doing, doing like assembly type, conference type. I literally, since COVID started, I haven't been, that one-to-one. I can't wait because I'm more of a in-person kind of presenter, and Zoom is beautiful, but it's just like, but I just don't, it's just different when I'm standing up and talking to parents. I'm walking around and be able to be demonstrative versus, stay in your square,
For sure. So before we sort of jump off, I want to sort of leave, is there a way that we can leave the audience with like one or two life hacks to navigating the next week for themselves or for their children, teenagers?
For what, parents, ask questions. They don't want advice all the time about what back in the day. They ask questions, and reconnect. And that's a big thing I'm talking to my parents about lately, is that they have rupture in their relationship and they fight and everything. They go their way and then they slowly, are in the kitchen together again. Reconnect and take responsibility to model that reconnection with your kids. Like, that was a hard conversation. Can we talk about it? I just wanted to tell you, I really, I wish I wouldn't have said that. And I'm sorry. And it's okay to apologize to your teen and just connect with them. Because when we have connection, again, we have with that influence, and they're amazing people. They're our kids.
Yeah, no, I love that. Connection is so key. That's why this is called the Reconnected Teenager podcast. We did not plan that, friends. We did not plan that at all, but here we are. Cool. Thank you so much. Obviously, if people want to reach out to you, you are at parentingmattersconsulting.com. You mentioned in our very first interaction that your why is because healthy families and healthy children make our schools better and safer, and healthy schools and healthy relationships make our communities better. I feel I'm so passionate about that. One of the things that I love, one of my slogans for 2020 was I'm saving the world one song at a time, not just through my music, but through the songs that I'm helping young people to write for themselves. And that goes back to the communication thing for you as well, right? So when it comes to your work, parentingmattersconsulting.com. Is there anything that people need to know before they book a time with you? How does that process look?
Yeah, and then it's there, they can do that right on this website that you have up here. Thank you for putting that up there. And the other thing that my passion for 2023 is developing parenting communities. So working with different parents that have kids that are around the same age, or kids even in the same class, maybe, or and building a parent community. So when I coach with them in groups, and then when I can let them go, fly on your own kind of thing, like we do with our teens. And so
Right.
I know they have a strong group and they have a strong community that they can rely on. And so that I'm moving in, I'm more intentionally going to group coaching. I do one-on-one coaching, but I'm more intentionally trying to get those group coaching because I want those communities, those
Yeah.
parent communities to be really strong.
Together we
So
rise, right? So
yeah,
that's cool. Well,
exactly.
thank you so much. I really appreciate your time on a Tuesday. I mean, I know it's afternoon there in California, but nonetheless, it's it's wonderful to meet you for real,
Yeah.
kind of on in the digital space. But to have you share your magic and your love and your light with the world, it's so powerful and so beautiful. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Of course, of course. And to everybody else who's watching right now, I hope that you enjoyed this wonderful 35 minutes with Dr. Judy. My name is Emma G. I am also a youth empowerment through songwriting coach, as well as a musician and keynote speaker. So if you are looking for tips and tricks to help your young person navigate their overwhelm, stress, and anxiety, if you are a parent and want some parenting coaching, go to parentingmattersconsulting.com. And if you want some help with channeling that into song, hit your girl up. My name
There
is
you
Emma
go.
G. Have a great rest of your week. Be safe, be kind, spread love like it's going out of fashion, and have an amazing day on purpose.
Thank you.